Welcome back, night owls and curious souls. Tonight, we peel back the velvet curtain on a tale of soapless royalty, and follow the sticky sweet rise of a noble woman, whose name you won't find in history books, but whose scent you might still smell on a cursed breeze. This is the beginning of the tragic, fragrant life of Lady Ethelberta Von Tarrow, a woman born with a silver spoon, a lace bonnet, and not a single intention of encountering clean water, so dim the lights. Light a candle, preferably one not made of whale fat. Settle in, because what you're about to hear is not a bedtime story. It's a bedpan story. Lady Ethelberta was born at exactly 3:17 a.m. in the year of our filth, 1662. During a thunderstorm so violent it reportedly peeled the paint off the nursery walls and revealed the mold underneath. Her first cry was said to resemble the screech of a startled goose. Some claimed it was a sign of royal power. Others blamed the cheese-heavy diet of her wet nurse. She entered the world wrapped in the finest linen money could buy and washed. Naturally, because laundering was considered bad luck for newborns, the linens were reused from her mother's previous 4 births, none of which had resulted in surviving children. Ethelberta's survival, then, was seen as a miracle, or at least a stubborn act of nasal warfare. Her mother, Lady Severina, the Duchess of Tarrow, was a formidable woman known for her towering wigs, daily devotion to St. Rosewater, and refusal to blink at anything poorer than a baron. Her father, Lord Cravemore Von Tarrow, was a man of great titles, questionable moustache, hygiene, and the personal belief that diseases were a suggestion, not a fact. They raised their daughter with all the luxuries of the nobility, lace from Lyon, diamonds from Dresden, and zero understanding of basic bodily maintenance. Now, you might be wondering, did the newborn Lady Ethelberta receive a bath? Of course not. In keeping with the family's ancient traditions and contemporary stupidity, bathing a newborn was seen as a slippery slope to death. Her grandmother once said, "A wet child is a dead child." So instead, the baby was rubbed with goose fat, rose petals, and an alarming amount of ground cloves. The result? She smelled like a pastry left too long in the sun. That scent would become her signature by the age of 3 months. She already wore miniature gloves infused with violet oil and ambergris. Her cradle was lined with sachets of dried lavender and despair. A servant was assigned specifically to fluff her aura, which involved waving fans of scented parchment around her head to preserve the illusion of freshness. The baby didn't cry much. She simply steamed quietly a fragrant dumpling in the royal stew. By age 4, Lady Ethelberta's education had begun. She was taught the essentials of noble womanhood: how to curtsy without dislodging one's wig, how to smile just enough to seem ethereal without revealing the disaster behind the lips, and how to avoid accidentally stepping in water. Water was, after all, the enemy. Her tutor, a woman named Mistress Hardwicke, had once been a courtier at the Belvarian Palace, but had retired after contracting a condition known as overclancing. Her hair had fallen out. Her skin had peeled. Some said she had once used soap twice in the same week. Now she taught young noblewomen how to avoid such fates. Soap, she told Ethelberta, is for the poor and the damned. A lady must never scrub. She must merely pat, powder, and pray. Ethel listened. Oh, how she listened. Her childhood was a parade of chalky cheeks, lavender salves, and fainting lessons. She learned how to collapse gracefully into a chaise longue, how to flutter a handkerchief near her nostrils when a peasant entered the room, and how to scent mask By dabbing perfume on her temples before social events, she was taught history, too, but only the parts that made her ancestors look fabulous. Her great-great-grandmother had reportedly once staved off a plague by wearing 7 layers of marjoram-scented petticoats and refusing to open her windows. No one survived in the village below, but she died looking fragrant. Ethelberta's destiny was to outdo her. At 8 years old, Ethelberta received her first wig, a modest one, by noble standards, just 8 inches high, powdered with lily starch and studded with fake pearls. It was a gift from her aunt, Countess Wilhelmina, a woman so committed to artifice that her eyebrows were painted on with ink made from crushed beetles. The wig ceremony was elaborate. A priest was summoned. Perfume was thrown like holy water. The child's head was shaved to reduce temptation, and her new hairpiece was affixed with heated glue and gentle threats. Once attached, it could not be removed for months. Instead, it was powdered daily, scented hourly, and scratched hourly with a gold-plated louse sticker birthday gift from her father. When lice inevitably moved in, they were named, a family tradition. If you must share your crown, her mother said, at least make it civil. Her first louse was named Benedict, and he lived for 4 months. Her wardrobe grew with her. By 12, she owned 56 gowns, none of which had ever seen a drop of water. They were aired out in the tower once a month and perfumed by handmaids who coughed blood discreetly into laced handkerchiefs. Her favorite dress was known as the Weeper, a silk monstrosity dyed in crushed violets and stiffened with starch, to the point of unintentional violence. It had once knocked over a chamberlain. She loved it. Underneath the gowns, absolutely nothing. As was the fashion of the time, underwear was seen as barbaric. A lady needs no drawers, her governess said, only dignity and good posture. Ethelberta had both at least, until the incident with the gust of wind and the ambassador from Florence. But that's for another night. By her teenage years, Lady Ethelberta was known throughout the region as the bloom of Belvaria. Not for her looks, though she had the angular cheekbones and fixed expression expected of her station, but for her smell, which could be detected from several rooms away. Her perfume collection included Despair in Bloom, a rose-based blend with hints of vinegar, midnight lie, an aggressive musk with top notes of cinnamon and regret essence, of Triumph, allegedly infused with powdered unicorn horn, actually goat bone. She didn't just wear perfume. She bathed in it. Her bedsheets were soaked in jasmine oil. Her gloves were steeped in crushed myrrh. She had handkerchiefs for each hour of the day, one for sniffing, one for waving, and one for shielding herself from the common folk, of course. By age 15, her teeth had already begun to revolt. She had been raised on candied violets, sugar wafers, and something called honey bricks, which were essentially dental grenades. Her gums were soft, her molars shaky, and her smile tighter than a bodice on banquet day. Brushing was considered dangerous. It roused the spirits in the gums. Instead, she rinsed with spiced wine and chewed aniseed. When a tooth finally fell out, it was replaced with a pearl. By the time of her engagement, she had 7 pearl teeth and a tendency to slur when nervous. At 17, she was betrothed to Crown Prince Wilbert, a man known primarily for his collection of hats and his chronic sweating. The union was political, arranged between 2 nations with very different smells and very similar debts. Their first meeting was awkward and aromatic. He bowed, she curtsied. Their wigs briefly touched. A cloud of flour and patchouli exploded. Between them, a maid fainted. He presented her with a brooch. She gave him a scented glove, still damp with bergamot. They were engaged within the hour. Good evening, brave souls and midnight listeners. If you made it through part 1 without gagging or googling ambergris side effects, congratulations. You've earned yourself part 2, where we descend further into the fragrant pit of excess, etiquette, and entirely imagined elegance. When we last left Lady Ethelberta Von Tarrow, she was the rising star of Belvaria, powdered, perfumed, and perilously close to the throne. Tonight, we pick up where every royal dream begins, a ceremony soaked in tradition, terror, and 17 kinds of floral oil. So pour yourself something decadent, dim the lamps, perhaps hold a clove between your teeth for historical accuracy, because we're heading into the most sacred, ridiculous day of Lady Ethelberta's life. Her coronation day. The morning of the miracle Ethelberta awoke on the morning of her coronation beneath 42 pounds of brocade, bathed in jasmine vapor, and with 2 handmaids whispering prayers for strength. Not for her spirit, for her neck. Her new coronation wig had arrived in the night. It was not so much a hairstyle as it was a load-bearing structure, constructed from horsehair, wire, taffeta, and powdered chicken bone to hold shape and absorb. Shame, it was modelled after the Belvarian national flower of bloom that hadn't existed since the Great Garden Rot of 1583. Putting it on required 2 men with ropes, a priest with strong arms, and a ladder. The wig stood 22 inches high and was decorated with miniature golden birds, embroidered ribbons, and because no one said no to the Queen's antlive moth, sewn inside for natural movement, the moth would later escape during the banquet and trigger what history now calls the candle fire incident. But that's for another part. Dress like you're lying to God now. One cannot simply wear a wig of architectural magnitude without a dress to match. Her coronation gown had been 6 months in the making and required its own dedicated carriage. The color, Belvarian moon, decay, a pale grey with undertones of expensive mildew. The fabric, silk, linen, gold thread, and sorrow. The structure, layers upon layers of petticoats, hoops, and spiritual compromise. The outer skirt measured 11 feet across, forcing Ethelberta to enter the chapel sideways, and causing at least 3 minor injuries when she turned too quickly. Underneath all this opulence was, of course, absolutely nothing. As discussed in part 1, royal women wore no undergarments. It was scandalous to suggest a lady might need drawers when she had dignity, perfume, and 17 layers of ruffled denial. One lady-in-waiting described the ensemble. Best, she looked like a chandelier that had been cursed by a sorcerer with unresolved trauma. The coronation itself, God save the stench. The coronation ceremony was held in Belvaria's Grand Cathedral, a building so old that half the gargoyles had leprosy. Nobles from across the realm gathered to witness the spectacle, draped in fabrics, powdered like ghosts, and reeking of floral aggression. Ethelberta entered the cathedral to the sound of trumpets and collapsing hairpieces. The ritual was solemn, sacred, ridiculous. She knelt before the archbishop, who dabbed scented oil on her forehead while silently holding his breath. She was handed the royal scepter, which smelled strongly of cloves and lies. And finally, she was crowned with the tiara of Aurelian flames, a relic last worn by Queen Theresia, the Inflammable, who had unfortunately leaned too close to a ceremonial torch in 1507 to avoid a repeat. The royal guards now carried water buckets, just in case the crown reignited old habits. When the crown was placed on Ethelberta's head, the choir sang. When she fainted under the combined weight of the crown and wig, they sang louder. The feast of formal decay Every coronation ends in a banquet, and this one was no different. The tables were lined with golden platters, marzipan sculptures, roasted peacocks with jeweled beaks, and scented candles placed not for light, but to disguise the faint odor of powdered rot. Ethelberta, now queen, sat at the head of the table. In her newly built throne chair with neck support, there were toasts, poetry, recitals, and a performance by the Royal Nose Flute Ensemble. But despite the grandeur, the star of the evening was the smell. Multiple diplomats later reported that the banquet hall had a scent profile, resembling crushed violets, roasted boar, forgotten onions. Panic one ambassador fainted. A duchess threw up discreetly behind a tapestry. The Count of Westchester claimed he saw God through the scented fog, and God was mostly confused. Ethelberta, she smiled through it all. Her powder held, her perfume flowed. She was now queen in every visible and olfactory way. The royal routine begins life. After the coronation became a routine of rituals designed to preserve illusion and suppress sweat. Her mornings began with a scenting ceremony during which 5 handmaids applied layers of perfume in specific order: base note, ambergris, and despair middle note, crushed lilac and iron top note, hysteria with a hint of bergamot after scenting, came powdering. Her entire body was dusted with starch, chalk, and flour, until she resembled a startled scone. Her wig was refilled with new powder each day, creating a permanent mist trail as she walked by midday. She had to be scratched, not because of boredom, but because her scalp itched like betrayal. This was where the louse stick came in again. She now had 3: morning, midday, and diplomatic emergency. Her meals were mostly liquid. She could no longer chew properly. Her teeth, those that remained, had begun to rattle during public speeches. Still, she waved. Still, she smiled. The mouse in the ballroom. It happened on the 3rd week of her reign. The ballroom was packed. Candles were lit. Violinists were playing something vaguely noble and entirely off-key. Ethelberta, dressed in crimson brocade and scented with crushed garden and fever, twirled slowly with a visiting prince. And then it happened. A squeak, a twitch, a blur of grey fur that launched itself from the back of her wig and onto the prince's cravat. Screams, panic. A guard drew his sword and accidentally sliced a turkey. The mouser, bold creature, later dubbed Lord Dandruff by palace servants, had apparently been nesting in Ethelberta's hair for several days, feasting on powder and living rent-free in the folds of starch. The prince fled. A duchess fainted. The royal cat refused to intervene. She didn't flinch. She simply lifted her louse stick, dabbed her temple with lavender oil, and declared, "This kingdom shall not be ruled by vermin, unless they wear lace." It was the first time the people cheered for her. Whispers in the powder behind the scenes, however, not all was well. The Palace of Perfume, as the court was now mockingly called, had become a place of suspicion and snivelling. One noble claimed the queen's perfume made his pigeons ill. Another insisted her gowns were haunted by mildew spirits. Servants began to wear nosecloths just to survive her morning walks. But to Ethelberta, it was a sign of power. If her subjects couldn't breathe, they couldn't complain. Her scent had become her weapon, an olfactory reminder that she was above them. Quite literally, her wig now had a second-floor dot. Closing thoughts and windows, and so concludes part 2. In the smothering saga of Queen Ethelberta Von Tarrow, a woman whose reign had begun not with reform or reason, but with rose oil, rouge, and a rodent scandal so severe it became a folk song, in part 3. We'll journey into the deepest corners of palace life. We'll meet the perfumer tasked with inventing 16 new scents to mask the royal laundry closet. We'll explore the great powder shortage of 63. And we'll dive into Ethelberta's private journal, where she records her dreams of flying, bathing, and occasionally setting fire to her own wig just to feel something. So stay tuned. Noble viewer, light some incense, hug your shampoo bottle, and be grateful, eternally grateful that your head isn't full of starch, moths, and political metaphor. Until next time, powder boldly, scratch with dignity, rule fragrantly. We open tonight on a queen seated not on a throne, but on a ventilated velvet stool, surrounded by 57 perfumes and a growing sense of dread. It had been 1 year since Queen Ethelberta was crowned. 1 year of cinnamon-scented diplomacy, lace-covered decrees, and floral fogs so thick they had to start issuing visibility alerts in the Great Hall. And beneath it all, something was beginning to fester, not just in her wigs, but in the kingdom itself. The perfumed illusion was wearing thin, literally. The great gown scandal was just weeks away. But first, the perfumer's panic. Let us talk, dear listener, about Master Cloveheart, the royal perfumer. This man had once been hailed as the nose of the North, a genius of fragrance who could tell your social class by sniffing your gloves. He had designed Ethelberta's coronation scent, a volatile mix of rosewater, ambergris, and something he refused to name on moral grounds. But now he was exhausted. Since Ethelberta's ascent to the throne, he had been tasked with creating a new signature scent every 3 days. Not for diplomacy, mind you, for survival. Each gown, glove, and wig required its own fragrance. No repeats. Repeats meant weakness. Repeats meant smell, memory, and the queen. She could tell. She would enter the scenting chamber, sniff once, raise a single, immaculately drawn-in brow, and say something like, "This smells like Tuesday. Are we peasants, Cloveheart?" He hadn't slept in weeks. He had developed tremors in both hands from excessive flour grinding. His apprentices were going blind from inhaling powdered musk. One assistant grew a third nostril, possibly psychological, definitely tragic. Eventually, Master Cloveheart snapped. He fled the palace one night, screaming something about jasmine lies and the violets are watching. He was last seen hiding inside a barrel of vinegar outside the fish market. The great gown crisis. In the absence of Cloveheart, the queen's gowns began to tell the truth. You see, royal gowns, as we discussed in part 1, were never washed. They were aired, perfumed, sometimes rubbed down with a slice of citrus if things got desperate. But actual cleansing, unthinkable. And while perfume could delay decay, it could not undo it. On the 3rd day of spring festival, Queen Ethelberta emerged from her chambers wearing the gown known as Whispering Lavender, last worn during a midsummer hunt that had ended in tragedy and wild goose infestation. The gown had not been aired since. As she walked into the ballroom, a warm draught caught the hamand, unleashed what one diplomat described as the spirit of an old soup. Servants began to cough. A viscountess quietly passed out behind a pillar. Several noblemen claimed the gown had achieved sentience and was whispering regrets. The queen didn't blink. She summoned a fan made of pressed violets and ostrich feathers and waved it once, declaring, "Let none question the aroma of authority." But word had spread. Whispers began to rise like the stench beneath her skirts. The powder shortage of 63 disaster struck. 2 weeks later, the shipment of hair powder starch imported from the fields of East Haversley, ever arrived. A river flood had destroyed the bridge, the mill, and most of the workers' spirits. The court was gripped with terror. Without powder, wigs collapsed. Without powder, smells escaped. Without powder, the great illusion of royal purity crumbled like a stale biscuit in a sweaty glove. Ethelberta's head stylist, a man named Danton, the hairbinder, wept openly. He tried substituting crushed bread, flour, ground limestone. At one point, he powdered the Queen's head with ground pigeon bone and told her it was an ancient Belvarian tradition. It wasn't. The resulting rash covered 3 inches of her scalp and made her hairpiece smell like a haunted bakery. The wig room rebellion, the Queen's wig room, had once been her sanctuary. 57 towering styles stood on mannequin heads, arranged by mood, victory over the pox despondent, but decorative mourning. But make it flammable, but now they were collapsing. Without powder to stiffen the shapes, the wigs drooped. Without oils to mask the mice, the wigs moved. A royal guard claimed he saw one wig blink. The Queen refused to admit defeat. She ordered 2 handmaids to stand behind her at all times, fanning her scalp and occasionally whispering compliments. "Your Grace, you smell like triumph. Your Majesty, you resemble a sainted cloud." It worked, for a while. But then came the scandal. The cross-dress confrontation. It happened in the Hall of Ministers. Ethelberta arrived for her monthly council meeting wearing the silent orchard, a green satin dress last worn during a state dinner involving stew, fireworks, and emotional outbursts as she took her seat. Something cracked. A minister near the Queen's left elbow leaned in, sniffed unintentionally, and recoiled. He muttered, not quietly enough, "Your Majesty, I believe your dress has fossilized." There was silence. Then Ethelberta rose, in one fluid motion, and said, "Let it be known that I wear history, that my garments hold the scent of war and wisdom." A few courtiers clapped. One pretended to faint to avoid taking sides, but it was clear the court was turning, not out of malice, but out of pure nasal exhaustion. Murmurs in the servants' hall downstairs. Things were worse. The palace servants, long trained to endure the Queen's smellscapes, had reached their breaking point. They began organizing under the code name, the Airing Alliance. They demanded at least 1 laundered undergarment per month, still symbolic, not to be worn, a dedicated nose, recess for breaks, the right to wear scented masks, not just dabbed kerchiefs, the abolition of scented candle punishments. When the Queen caught wind literally of their growing rebellion, she summoned the head maid and asked if her scent had lost its power. The maid, old Winifred, survivor of 5 royal reigns and 2 chimney collapses, looked her in the eye and said, "Your Majesty, the nose cannot lie." That night, Winifred was reassigned to attic moth surveillance, which wasn't a punishment until you remembered. The wigs were stored there, the private journal of Queen Ethelberta's, somewhere in this olfactory decline. The Queen began to write her private journal, found years later inside a hollowed-out wig stand, offers us a rare glimpse into her scented psyche. They say I stink of power, of fear, of something ancient and floral. But is it not the duty of the crown to overwhelm? I miss silence, I miss rain. Sometimes I dream of walking into a river and emerging unscented. But then I remember, rivers have fish. It was the most vulnerable sentence ever written under a title beginning with Her Fragrant Excellency, closing the curtains and the nose As we end tonight's chapter, Queen Ethelberta remains seated upon her velvet throne, powderless, perfumed, and perilously close to losing her kingdom to the very thing that kept it. Stitched together -illusion. In part 4, we will uncover the wig heist of the century, the rise of the perfume cult, and the forbidden moment when Ethelberta finally face to face with a bath, but not willingly, and certainly not without witnesses. So, sleep tight, dear listeners. Clutch your soap like a relic. Hug your laundry like salvation. And remember, scent may rule kingdoms, but eventually, truth starts to smell. We begin in the attic, because of course we do. The palace of Belvaria had always kept its greatest treasures, where no one would willingly go, the attic. Here, beneath old rafters and above decaying tapestries, sat the royal wig archive, a shadowy corridor of mannequin heads, wearing powdered monuments to delusion. There were wigs for every conceivable crisis. Formal regret, high and somber, with subtle ash flourishes. Diplomatic fainting, wide, lopsided, and easy to collapse into. Winter of pretend modesty, a smaller wig rarely worn, mostly for funerals and theatre. There were 237 wigs in total, each carefully named, catalogued, and scented, until they were stolen. The Great Wig Heist of 1763. It began with a scream from Martha the powder clerk. She entered the attic one misty morning, as always, carrying her jar of lavender oil and fear. But today, instead of powdered majesty, she found nothing, just wigless heads, empty pedestals, and a lingering smell of goose grease. The archive had been cleaned out overnight. Initial theories included foreign spies, angry hairdressers, mice, unionizing, but within hours, leaflets appeared across the city. Dear citizens of Belvaria, the wigs have been liberated. Breathe free. Total panic. The queen locked herself in her scenting chamber for 3 days, refusing to be seen in public with what she called her emergency scalp. She issued a proclamation: "He who returns my wigs shall dine beside me. He who wears them shall be doused in vinegar and forgotten." But it was too late. The people had seen the queen's real head, and they whispered, "Rise of the unscented." Us now turned to the unscented, a revolutionary group of nobles, clerks, and commoners who had grown tired of life behind lace and lavender. Their demands were simple: fewer perfumes in state business, fewer corsets, ideally none, the right to wash one's clothing without it being seen as treason. They met in secret beneath the city, in old soap factories and abandoned bathhouses. There, they plotted the most dangerous idea in all of Belvaria: truth by cleanliness. They believed that if the queen could be made to bathe, the illusion would shatter. If the sovereign herself could be seen wet, then the entire monarchy, built on powdered artifice, would collapse under its own moist reality. Enter the bathing plan, the bathtub conspiracy. The unscented developed a 3-stage plot. Stage 1, steal the wigs, already accomplished. Stage 2, sabotage the perfume supply, in progress. Peppermint barrels were replaced with cabbage brine. Stage 3, lure the queen into a trap bath. The plan was simple. During the Festival of Blossoms, a grand celebration of fragrance and fertility, the queen would be invited to bless the fountain of eternal bloom, a newly built structure unveiled in the palace garden. But the fountain would, in truth, be a disguised bath. A group of unscented rebels would activate a mechanism, tipping Ethelberta directly into 500 gallons of rose-scented, but actual water. It would be public, humiliating, history-altering. But one thing stood in their way. The Royal Bath Aversion Protocol. You see, the Queen's fear of water had become institutionalized after the incident of 52, when a light spring drizzle ruined her entire diplomatic schedule. The Royal Council had implemented strict anti-moisture measures, including a 6-foot radius of parasol guards at all times, evaporation tunnels between chambers, and a personal motto: if it drips, it deceives. Bathing had become an act of moral weakness in Belvaria. Water was for fountains, not for rulers. Clean skin, it was said, invited rebellion. Ethelberta hadn't touched water directly since the age of 9, when her mother caught her licking condensation off a teacup and slapped her with a powder puff. The night before the bathhouse, the Festival of Blossoms, approached. Ethelberta grew restless. In her journal that evening, she wrote, "The air feels too sharp. I smell too few roses. I dreamt last night of rain, not storm rain. It touched my wig and whispered, 'Who are you beneath all this starch?' But duty called. And more importantly, so did the people, or so she believed." She arrived at the ceremony wearing a new wig called Floribunda Gloriosa, containing 4 silk birds and 1 real one, sedated, but optimistic. The garden sparkled. The nobles fanned themselves, and at the center of it all, the fountain, the fall of the Queen into a tub. The moment arrived. She stepped forward, lifted her scepter, and declared, "Let the floral spirit rise." That's when it happened. A click, a creak, and then a sudden mechanical lurch. The platform beneath her gave way, and with a gasp, a flurry of lace, and the scream of an awakening bird, Queen Ethelberta fell directly into the hidden bath. 500 gallons of slightly warm, rose-scented water consumed her. For the first time in 25 years, the Queen was submerged. The kingdom reacts, gasps, screams. One countess wept openly. The Queen emerged moments later, wigless, soaked, her makeup running like candle wax, her scepter floating beside her like a confused duck. For a second, the crowd stood frozen. Then came the sneeze. A single nobleman, overwhelmed by the scent of actual cleanliness, sneezed violently into his gloves. That broke the spell. A court musician fainted. The archbishop whispered, "It's the end times." The royal guards stared at her and, for the first time, saw a person, a wet, angry, blinking person. The speech that saved her. She stood there, dripping, shivering, scentless, and for the first time in her reign, spoke without artifice. "Yes," she said, voice cracked. "Yes, I bathe, I bleed, I sweat, I stink. And if I must be soaked to remind you I am human, then let the water come." The crowd gasped again, then silence, then applause. It began with a stable boy, then a duchess, then a dozen nobles. Soon the entire court was cheering, not for the crown, not for the perfume, but for the wet, fragile woman who had ruled them with scent and now stood before them as herself. The aftermath, unscented, had won, but so had the Queen. In the weeks that followed, wigs became smaller, perfume was rationed, baths were quietly reintroduced, first as ritual immersions, then as moral hygiene. The Queen kept ruling, but she smiled more. She even allowed her next portrait to be painted with her natural hair, short, frizzy, and very slightly damp. The people loved it. She never wore Floribunda Gloriosa again. The Royal Hygiene Accords won. Week after the Festival of Blossoms bath disaster, Queen Ethelberta summoned her ministers, attendants, and a thoroughly confused scribe named Philip, she announced, in a voice freshly hoarse from post-dip pneumonia, "Let it be known. The age of unwashed power is over. From this day forward, Belvaria shall be a kingdom of clean intent." Gasps, audible gasps. Lord Marrow, Minister of Sense and Courtyard Fragrance, fainted into a bowl of potpourri, but the Queen pressed on. She issued what would become known as the Royal Hygiene Accords, a sweeping set of reforms that shook the powdered halls of power to their very crusty foundation. Wigs limited to 12 inches tall, unless commemorating a funeral or diplomatic insult. Mandatory foot washing for ministers before cabinet meetings. Perfume usage capped 2-3 cents per noble per week. 1 bathing day a month for the entire palace staff, with optional lemon slices. It was revolutionary. It was risky. It was a bit too much, too fast. The fragrance rebellion within a fortnight. Resistance bloomed like mildew in an unwashed corset. The nobility, long addicted to powder and pageantry, formed the Council for the Preservation of Scented Nobility, known more simply as the Frags. They wore extra powdered wigs in protest. They held scent-overs, where they gathered in salons and passed around contraband musk behind closed lace curtains. One countess even attempted to smuggle rosewater in through a diplomatic cake, and their rallying cry: "If she smells like us, is she still above us?" The cult of the clean queen. But the backlash was only half the story. You see, far outside the perfumed court, among the city's washerwomen, street vendors, and bathhouse apprentices, something new was forming. A cult, a quiet, reverent, soap-scented movement of those who believed that Ethelberta's fall into the bath was divine intervention. They called her the Clean Queen. They sang hymns while scrubbing laundry. O Queen of Steam and Rising, do who let the river pass it through. They built shrines of discarded soaps and rainwater barrels. They distributed pamphlets, declaring, "Cleanliness is not weakness. It is royal resurrection." The Queen was horrified. "I am not a goddess," she whispered one night to her reflection, wiping bath mist from the mirror. "I'm just slightly less greasy." But it didn't matter. The cult had spoken, and they were multiplying. The bishop and the bathrobe scandal. It gets worse. Weeks after the Accords, the Queen began hosting private bathing councils, quiet sessions where select nobles were invited to experience bathing, supervised, ceremonial, scented, but subtly. One such event involved Bishop Alphonse, a notoriously musty man who hadn't touched water since an unfortunate puddle incident in 1729. He was hesitant. He was suspicious. He was also hiding several lavender sachets under his robes to cheat the clean decree. When asked to disrobe for the bath, he panicked, tripped, fell directly into the Queen's robe rack, knocking over a tray of bath salts and accidentally lighting his wig on fire with a devotional candle. The event was later recorded in Palace records as the cleansing of the unwilling bishop. He survived, but retired immediately and moved to a cave. The Queen, for her part, declared, "Let the fire of fear be extinguished by the waters of humility," which sounded holy, but she definitely read it off the bath salts label. International repercussions word spread across Europe. In France, King Felipe of the Lesser Coast was horrified. "A queen who bathes. Soon they'll ask me to clip my beard." In Austria, a duchess wept openly into her hair powder, declaring, "If she is mortal, what am I?" Spain, however, was thrilled. Their queen had been bathing since 1701 and had simply never told anyone. "Welcome to the soap," she reportedly wrote in a letter to Ethelberta. "It gets easier after the third scrub. Alliances shifted. Treaties were delayed, not over borders, but over scent policies. It was the world's first olfactory Cold War, the duel in the rose garden. But let's get to the real climax of this chapter. For every cult that praised her, and every peasant who named their bath barrel Ethelberta, the queen still had enemies, chief among them Lady Vesper of North Belvaria, also known as the last powdered purist. Lady Vesper was everything Ethelberta had once been: towering powdered wigs, scented lace gloves, an unwavering belief that water was for fish, not for duchesses. She publicly challenged the queen to a rose garden duel, the most perfumed place in the kingdom, claiming, "If you can stand against me, unscented and unmasked, and not collapse under your own humanity, I shall renounce my powders." The queen accepted. The duel was strange. No swords, no guns, just standing in the heat, in full nowhere, among the roses, until one woman fainted from natural body scent. It lasted 3 hours. Birds dropped from the sky. Attendants wilted. A bee stung a duke. But at the end, it was Lady Vesper who staggered, twitched, and collapsed into a hedge of wild jasmine. The queen stood, victorious, damp, flushed. Human. Court erupted. The legacy of the soap, years by the year's end, everything had changed. The Ministry of Sense was dissolved. Wigs were required to be aired monthly. A national bath day was declared, with music, ribbons, and optional lemon peels. Public fountains were reopened. One even got a slide. The queen never fully gave up her perfumes, but she used them now as punctuation, not disguise. And in a final gesture of honesty, she had her official portrait repainted, this time showing her mid-bath, hair slicked back, steam rising, a small smile on her unpowdered face. It shocked the nation. It also sold 347 miniature reproductions, closing the curtains and opening a window. Roses and redemption. Queen Ethelberta Von Tarrow, once the symbol of powdered perfection, had emerged as something far more potent, a monarch who smelled like herself, not always floral, not always fragrant, but always real. How she handled a soap tax uprising, the scandalous invention of royal deodorant, and the quiet, emotional moment when she finally swam. Not by force, but by choice. So, until then, dear listener, stay curious, stay clean, and remember, wigs may rise, powders may fall, but the truth always leaves a scent. A clean queen in a dirty court. It's been a year. Queen Ethelberta, now informally known among commoners as Our Lady of the Lather, has made bathing fashionable, if not entirely welcome, in court. Mixed results, yes. Ministers now bathe monthly. Yes, chamber pots have been relocated out of the dining halls. And yes, the palace has officially banned goose grease as moisturizer. But change, as always, begets enemies. Beneath the veneer of powdered cooperation, resentment stews. Nobles nod politely while rubbing scented wax under their sleeves. Servants leak rumors that the queen now sweats on purpose. Worst of all, the court's perfumers, once the most powerful artisan guild in Belvaria, have been reduced to producing scented apologies sachets. And they're not happy about it. The powder conspiracy let us introduce the League of the Nose, an underground group of disgraced perfumers, wig merchants, and antique glove repairmen who believe the Queen's cleanliness is nothing short of cultural sabotage. their goals. Restore the sacred hierarchy of scent. Reinstate powdered wigs as a requirement for land ownership. And above all, ensure the queen never swims. You see, bathing is one thing, but swimming, voluntary submersion, that would mean she enjoys water. That would be the end of everything they once powdered to protect. They begin plotting, quietly, craftily, with nutmeg oil and grudges. Meanwhile, at the palace baths, the queen has taken to walking, alone, at dusk, past empty courtyards and stone lions, and through the now renovated royal bathhouse. Once condemned as a tub of sedition, she doesn't speak, she just observes. The tiles, the steam, the drip of cold water collecting in polished basins, and always, always, the sound of movement in the water. The suggestion of a body entering, floating, free. She never joins. Not yet, but something stirs. Not rebellion, longing. The soap tax rioter crossed the capital. In the district of Spindlecross, a new crisis bubbles up to fund her hygiene initiatives. The Queen had quietly introduced a small tax on soap. Just a sliver, a humble scrub-fee dot. But to the people, especially those who had embraced their new cleanliness with joy, it felt like betrayal. She made us clean, and now she charges us for the privilege. Riots erupt, banners unfurl, nitrogen monoxide taxation without foamation. Soapy effigies of nobles are marched through the streets. One baker even lathers a portrait of the Queen in butter, and publicly scrubs it with a stale baguette. It is chaos, beautifully clean chaos. The Queen is forced to act. The speech in the soap. Queen Ethelberta arrives in Spindlecross without wig or corset, just a cloak and a bar of soap. She climbs atop a cart and speaks, not as queen, but as woman, damp and direct. You think I tax you for your cleanliness, but I tax myself every day I wear a crown. Cleanliness is not a weapon, it is a mirror, and we are finally ready to look. Silence. Then an old washerwoman yells, "You look awful. Without the wig, dear, but you look real." And that's enough. The riots end. The soap tax stays, but with a rebate for households under 3 wigs tall. The attempted restricting way turned now to the most fragrant coup attempt in royal history. The League of the Nose, desperate, mounts a plan. Step 1. Kidnap the royal bathwater taster. Yes, that's a position. He drinks bathwater to test for poison. Paid handsomely. Terrible teeth. Step 2. Replace the Queen's evening soaking salts with high-grade illegal musk, designed to penetrate skin and memory. Step 3. Frame her for intentional perfumery, a violation of her own reforms. It almost works. But the Queen, wise to plots, and suddenly suspicious of her own bathroom, sends her parrot Sir Muddle in first. Sir Muddle lands in the water, squawks once, and immediately begins reciting 18th century love poems in French, a clear sign of musk exposure. The Queen avoids the trap. Sir Muddle remains romantically confused to this day. And then the swim-no ceremony. No fanfare, just dusk, silence, and the Queen, once again, walking past the baths. But this time, she stops, removes her shoes, her outer cloak, her doubts, and for the first time, not to prove anything, not to survive, but simply because she wants to, she steps into the water. No attendants, no perfume, no fear, just her skin, herself, and the soft sound of ripples where silence once ruled. She swims, awkwardly, slowly, gloriously, And when she emerges, dripping, breathless, and grinning, the only witness is a servant girl, too stunned to see Urtsey, the whisper that changed history the next morning. The palace doesn't announce it. There's no proclamation, no festival, no portrait, but everyone knows. She swam, the whispers go, not because she had to, but because she could. The noblemen take extra water in their tea. The city fountains are crowded with children. One elderly duchess is seen floating in her soup tureen. The kingdom shifts, not explosively, not violently, but like water, gradual, relentless, irrevocable. The clean empire expands by now. The clean queen's reforms have splashed far beyond Belvaria. What began as a single, slightly scandalous bath has rippled outward into a full-blown continental craze. Across Europe, monarchs are tentatively rinsing, diplomats are steaming, and nobles are awkwardly realizing that their footmen are beginning to smell. Better than them, in Denmark, the king falls into a koi pond and declares it the will of soap. In Florence, an underground group of nuns begins bottling river water under the label Holy Dew. And in Bulgaria, hygiene becomes the new luxury. Bathers' balls are hosted under moonlight, where guests wear translucent linen and bathe in rosewater fountains while sipping cucumber gin. The city's first public bath opera opens, where sopranos sing from marble tubs while baritones scrub their elbows to rhythm. There is even a fashion trend among the younger nobles, translucent silk robes that cling when damp, worn to imply I bathed, and I liked it. The queen watches it all, amused, exhausted, and deeply aware. Change is no longer hers to control. Enter Lady Florentina of Muskmore, but peace is for peasants, because now enter Lady Florentina of Muskmore, former royal, perfumer dismissed after the clean decree, and now high priestess of the fragrant resistance. Florentina has spent the past year in exile, hoarding oils, experimenting with illegal resins, and bottling something she calls Memory No. 7. A perfume so potent it supposedly causes weeping, romantic hallucinations, and occasional spontaneous marriage proposals. She is rich. She is furious, and she wants Ethelberta to pay, not with coin, with nostalgia. The letter arrives unsealed, scrawled in purple ink, and scented with crushed hibiscus. The letter reads, "Dear Queen of Baths, you bathe, we remember. Come to the spa of echoes, where scent still sings. Let us speak. No guards, no soap. Bring only your nose, if you still have one. F." The court is divided. Some scream trap. Others whisper redemption. The queen, of course, says nothing. But 3 days later, she rides alone into the fog. The spa of Ecos is not a spa, it's a temple. Once the most exclusive scent club in the empire, now shuttered, cracked, and echoing with ghostly fragrance inside. Florentina waits, veiled radiant, reeking of 100 banned memories. She bows. "You used to smell like jasmine and power," she says. "And you used to get paid to lie to me," Ethelberta replies. The conversation that follows is long, bitter, and haunting. FF. Lauren Tina accuses her of killing beauty. The queen accuses her of selling delusion. They speak of girlhoods powdered too, soon of mothers who masked their daughters in lilac to make them palatable, and of how scent had once protected them both from men, grief, and mirrors. Then Florentina removes a vial from her robes. One drop, one whiff. "You'll remember the woman you were before the water." The queen holds it, stares, then opens it, and smells. Nothing, because the vial is empty. A test, Florentina smiles. Good, you passed. And for the first time in years, the two women laugh bitterly. Briefly, beautifully. They part without promises. The Parliament of Towels back in the capital. The Queen returns to her next crisis. The nobles, tired of reforms, tired of bathing, and deeply tired of water-stiffened lace, have formed the Parliament of Towels, a symbolic opposition party that refuses to dry itself fully until the Queen renounces the tyranny of hygiene. They hold damp salons. They speak in whispers and mildew metaphors. One duke writes a pamphlet titled, "My country 'tis of tea, and I smell like it should." The Queen, ever theatrical, responds with a 72-hour bathion, soaking in the palace fountain until every single minister joins her, or SHRIVELS. Most join, one doesn't. He is now known only as Lord Prune, the Queen's second soak and first tears one evening. As the city sleeps, Ethelberta returns to the bathhouse. She slips out of her robes, steps into the same pool that once scared her into silence and sinks. Not because she's tired, but because she's thinking of what she gave up. Not just perfume, not just powder, but the anonymity of artifice, the safety of the mask. Underwater, she opens her eyes and cries, but the tears don't sting. They swirl because now even grief is allowed to be clean. The secret poets of Steam Street, delightful side effect of the Queen's hygiene revolution. Bath poetry. Dozens of anonymous bards begin scrawling verses on soap bars, steaming mirrors, and public tub walls. They call themselves the Steam Street Society. Notable works include Ode to a Loofah, I Licked a Soap and Thought of You, the Duchess and the Drain, an erotic tragedy. The Queen reads them in secret, and one morning leaves a bar of soap in the palace bath with her own inscription. The scent fades, but you stayed. It is never stolen, only read. A brief note on the royal parrots a muddle, still romantically confused from the musk exposure in Part 6, has now fallen in love with a carved wooden duck. He serenades it nightly. Nobody stops him. He deserves this. The invention that shouldn't have happened, it begins, as most catastrophes do, with a genius in a cellar. His name, Ignatius von Brindlewat, a reclusive scholar, former footman, and the man whose greatest passions were the Queen's vision, the noble art of steam, and dramatically blowing things up in the name of science. He had grown tired of the old rituals, the stoking of coal, the ladling of water, the way one had to wait for warmth, and so he created the boilertron, a mechanical bath engine designed to deliver instant hot water through a series of copper pipes, steam chambers, and something ominously called the scalding bellows. He meant to revolutionize comfort. Instead, he boiled a bishop. The scalding incident of St. Basil's Bishop Humplegrove, a beloved cleric and amateur chess prodigy, had just entered the newly retrofitted clergy bath when the boilertron malfunctioned. Eyewitnesses say the bath hissed, sang the national anthem in steam bursts, and erupted in lavender-scented fury. The bishop survived. Barely. He now communicates only in gasps and religious riddles. The church was unimpressed. Within days, pamphlets flooded the capital. Hellfire in a bathtub scolding is not salvation, God said. Wash. Not walk. The Queen, horrified, orders an immediate investigation. The boilertron is dismantled. Ignatius is exiled to the north, but the damage is done. Hot water is now a heresy. Meanwhile, at the Royal Taurine response to the scandal, And perhaps sensing the Queen's vulnerability, the Parliament of Towels rises again. But this time, they aren't just damp. They're armed, led by the Earl of Waffled Weave. They begin manufacturing protest towels embroidered with slogans like, "Dryness is dignity, no scalding without representation, our skin, our temperature." They march on the palace. They encircle bath. They host dramatic towel folding ceremonies on palace steps. And one midnight, they launch the Fluff Rebellion, flinging wet towels over the palace gates in silent protest. The Queen wakes to find her windows draped in damp defiance. She doesn't speak for days. A royal breakdown and brief exile 3 years ago, Queen Ethelberta would have clapped back with wit and wigs. Now, she retreats. She leaves the court, travels alone to the southern coast, lives incognito in a fishing village, under the name Bertie. Locals say she taught soap carving to children, helped midwives boil clean linens, even won a drinking contest with a goat. But mostly, she thinks of Ignatius, of the bishop, of Florentina's empty vial, of how progress always seems to burn before it builds. And after a month, she returns, not as a conqueror, but as a cleanser of chaos. The towel trials her. First decree, a public tribunal. Every leader of the Parliament of Towels is summoned, given fair voice, asked to explain. The court is held in a circular bathhouse, its marble floor slick with condensation, its benches steam-dash warmed. Each noble arrives in dramatic, damp cloaks, determined to resist. But as the trial unfolds, something strange happens. They speak. She listens. They accuse. She agrees. "Yes," she says, "we rushed, we scalded. We forgot that warmth must be earned, not engineered." She doesn't punish them. She pardons them. Even the Earl of Waffled Weave, who once compared her bath, reforms to drowning in democracy. Instead, she appoints him Minister of Temperature Moderation. He cries, publicly, into a towel. Ironically, the day the bathhouse burned, just as peace seems possible, fate strikes again. The original royal bathhouse, the birthplace of her first swim, her first soap rebellion, her first public tears, burns to the ground. No one knows how. Some say sabotage. Others whisper about a faulty candled foot warmer left by Sir Muddle, still in love with a wooden duck. Now training as a valet, the Queen arrives as the last pillar. Falls. No speech, no song. Just her hands, soot-covered, lifting a scorched soap bar from the rubble. She presses it to her chest and says only, "We begin again." The founding of the great hygienic college from the ashes, she builds something new. A school, not for nobles, not for clergy, but for everyone. Barbers, bathers, midwives, perfumers, street cleaners, soap makers, children of laundresses, all welcome. It is called the Belvarian College of Practical Cleanliness and Emotional Rinsing. Its motto, purity is not perfection, it's participation. They teach science, safety, sanity, and subtle poetry. Scrawled on wet tiles, it becomes the most beloved institution in the land. A letter from Florentine months later. A letter arrives, scented faintly with rosemary and grief. "Dear Queen, I did not burn it, but I wept when it fell. You were never my enemy, only the truth I couldn't bottle. Should you ever wish to remember, I've left a drop of memory, no. 7 beneath the 3rd tile in the west corner of what remains. It smells like how we were before the world expected us to perform. Yours in regret and resilience, F. Queen doesn't dig up the tile, but she walks over it every week, barefoot, the Queen's. New palace bath is small, private, no golden faucets, no peacock-shaped taps, no incense, just clean stone, still water, and one bench for sitting. She uses it nightly, not to be pure, not to be powerful, but to be still. When silence speaks louder than soap. The discovery was an accident. A crack had split the marble beneath Queen Ethelberta's breakfast alcove, a fine little corner tiled in lemon and sunlit precisely at 7:12 every morning, when the masons pried it open to inspect the damage. They didn't find a structural fault. They found a door, ancient dust, choked with a faint scent of sandalwood and shame. It led downward, steep, slick, spiral stairs, winding into the stone foundations beneath. The east wing. Most had forgotten this space existed at all. In fact, not since the reign of Queen Millicent, the Moist, a monarch remembered for her soapless reign and tragic refusal to believe in water, had anyone dared to descend. At the bottom was a room, silent, damp, intact. The royal washroom of queens. Past the tiling was exquisite, seashell mosaics curling into faded crowns, a deep bathing pool still half full with stale water, and a dozen empty sconces clinging to the walls like petrified bats. But then the whispering began, not wind, not dripping, voices faint, distant, as though carried through the pipes, from some other place or some other time. At first the workers dismissed it. Poor air, they said, echoes from the palace kitchens. But as more people stepped inside, they heard them too, soft murmurings bleeding through the walls, laughter, weeping, arguments muffled by ceramic glaze. The Queen was notified. Scholars were summoned. Clergy arrived in silent shoes. One of them tried sprinkling holy water into the drains, but it just gurgled back up with a wet cough. The voices continued, grew clearer. Someone identified a line from Queen Dorothea's journals, something she had whispered once in a bath during her final week of rule. Another recognized a maid's song from 1724, sung when she thought no one was listening, and someone else, a terrified young plumber named Clive, swore he heard Florentina's voice. The conclusion was outrageous, but undeniable. The room remembered. The pipes, the tile, the very stone. It had absorbed the voices of those who had washed, wept, or whispered within it. Every monarch, every servant, every steam-slicked confession. The Queen ordered everyone out. Then, alone, she entered the room, torch in hand, steam clinging to her sleeves. She stepped forward and listened. For a time, there was only silence. Then, faintly, her own voice, from years ago. Nervous, sharp. If I die in this bath, let the towels be burned first. She frowned. Then another voice, a younger, crueler voice she had once loved. FF Florentina. She doesn't know. She thinks soap will save her. Ethelberta didn't move. She stood, rooted in stone and silence, as the past wrapped itself around her shoulders like a wet towel. For hours she sat, listening to herself, to others, to the ghost of a nation scrubbed to clean. She emerged at dawn, her robe soaked, her face unreadable. One sentence left her lips, seal it, and it was done. The next morning, brick and mortar erased the door. No ceremony, no witnesses, only the soft echo of whispers, now trapped forever behind walls. But something had shifted in the Queen. She no longer bathed with heat. Her servants were instructed to pour only cold water. Mirrors were removed from all public bathhouses, replaced with simple tiles bearing etched flowers or soft-spoken slogans, like silence is sacred and lather gently. When asked why, she said, "No one needs to hear themselves that clearly." Word of the room spread, of course. Rumors always do. Some said the Queen had heard her own betrayal in the pipes. Others believed the washroom had shown her the cost of her reign, not in rebellion or ruin, but in reflection. But Belvaria carried on. Bathhouses reopened. Towels dried on balconies. Soap remained carved and sold in elegant bars. Yet people began to notice oddities, voices humming faintly in the plumbing, laughter when no one spoke, a sigh echoing in an empty basin. They called it the hush, a lingering murmur in the kingdom's water. Some believed it a blessing, a reminder that nothing truly disappears. Others claimed the walls had started listening. But no one doubted what it meant, because in Belvaria now, clean never meant quiet, and water, like memory, never forgets. The palace smelled of violets, a soft scent, not as loud as rose or as clingy as lavender. It drifted through corridors, curling under doors, wrapping around guards like a farewell hug from a perfumed aunt. It was the Queen's scent, but fainter, now, because Queen Ethelberta had not been seen in public for 7 days. No bathhouse visits, no lemon-tiled breakfasts, no thundering lectures about towel storage, just silence and violets. The courtiers whispered, as courtiers do. Some believed she had locked herself in her personal spa and turned to salt, medused by her own reflection. Others claimed she'd slipped into the whispering washroom through a hidden backpipe and was now part of the plumbing system, occasionally emerging from faucets to deliver advice. The truth, however, was simpler and sadder. She was tired. For 32 years she had scrubbed, steamed, powdered, and perfumed an entire nation into submission. She had fought wars with towels, conquered provinces through bathhouse diplomacy, lost lovers to scented treachery, and gained power by mastering the fine art of never sweating. But time had crept in, not in wrinkles. She didn't allow those, but in silence. One morning she rose, looked into her thread-eared, magnified, gold-leafed mirror, and saw nothing she recognized. Just a clean face, worn like an old gown, and she knew it was time. The final cleansing announcement came without fanfare, just a scroll nailed to the palace gate, written in her own hand. "I have bathed enough. The water is still. Leave it so." The next day she summoned no attendants. She walked alone to the grand marble bath, the one beneath the North Tower, once reserved for visiting dignitaries and notoriously haunted by the ghost of a damp duchess. She entered, the doors shut, and the water ran. Steam filled the palace, so fragrant, so heavy, that the servants cried and the cats passed out. No one dared interrupt. She stayed inside for hours, some said days, until the water stilled and the doors opened. But Ethelberta was gone. The succession of Centaur was no body, just a robe, folded neatly on the bench, a comb, still warm, and a single bar of soap. Violet, dry, dry. The court panicked, as they often do. But then something remarkable happened. Nothing. There was no civil war, no royal chaos, no scramble for power, because Ethelberta had left everything ready, every law written, every cabinet appointed, every towel folded. She had scrubbed Belvaria so deeply into order that even her disappearance went smoothly, and so, The kingdom moved on. The bathhouses remained open. The perfumes continued to flow. The people of Belvaria still washed daily, or at least twice a week, depending on their schedule. But things were different now. Softer, less frantic, no more inspections, no more surprise towel audits, no more royal nose dash sniffings. Instead, her legacy lingered, not in law, but in ritual. To this day, when a Belvarian mother bathes her child, she hums a melody no one quite remembers learning. When a man lathers his beard before a difficult day, he does it facing east, the direction of the Queen's final bath, and every year, on the day of the final lather, citizens light violet candles and whisper into their sinks. "Thank you, that'll do." What happened to her? Some say she walked into the steam and became it. Others claim she's alive still, living under the palace, muttering to pipes, sipping lemon water, fully at peace. But the most popular theory, that Ethelberta finally found what she had never dared to believe in a warm bath that didn't need her. And in that stillness, she vanished. The final words. So ends the story of Queen Ethelberta Von Tarrow. The monarch who conquered was sent, ruled with soap, and left the world cleaner than she found it. She was not beloved. She was not feared. She was something rarer, remembered. For in the land of Belvaria, there are statues with combs, libraries shaped like bathtubs, and fountains that weep lavender. And every so often, when the steam rises just right, you'll swear you hear a voice whisper, "Scrub," behind the ears.